Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It's Wednesday, December 3rd, and we got to talk about some college football playoff rankings. Pretty much have all the answers. Going into this weekend, we pretty much know what all of the different scenarios would bring us, with one caveat that we'll talk about in the first segment. Jump into those CFP rankings, what the bracket would be right now, and how it could kind of shift around just a little bit depending on the results this weekend. And then we'll just do a little bit of a weekend roundup, a little bit of a shorter show today. We'll get into all the coaching carousel updates. Charlie Weis going back to Ole Miss, at least for the playoff, to call plays for them. We got Penn State update. It's not going well, as you can imagine, over there in State College. We'll talk about early signing day for a little bit. I always find it better to just jump into that when it's all said and done, because a lot's going to happen over the next 2 days. So thought I would leave it alone for the most part, but got to talk about Jared Curtis flipping from Georgia to Vanderbilt, a number of other things that we'll jump into, and then we'll finish it off. I got 5 best bets as we head into this weekend. Let's just hope we can go over 500 in the final weekend of the season. But at the end of the day, let's go ahead and jump into this thing, and let's talk about those CFP rankings that came out yesterday. Apologies for that not being quite center. Let's go ahead and jump into this version of the CFP rankings. They came out yesterday, and not too much of a change overall at the top. Obviously, A&M drops down a little bit. Let's start with the bottom teams here for a second. And let's just focus on the group of 5 teams, because that's really the only part of this that has a massive impact as we head into this weekend. Tulane, still the number 1 G5 team, no question about that. I don't think that was much of a debate as we headed into this bracket. No, the big one is North Texas is above JMU. I think that puts that to bed, that if Virginia were to win, then JMU is likely out of the CFP. The winner of the American, I think, is locked into a spot regardless of what happens in the ACC, and JMU would be out. So JMU's got to hope for a win, and then hope for a Duke win as well. And I still don't know where Duke is. I know in the AP poll they're around 40th when you go into the others receiving votes category, but where are they? For the CFP committee, it's very unknown. I don't know what a win over Virginia would do for them. I like to think that it wouldn't put them over JMU, which they don't deserve to be. So it could very well be a group of 5 teams in there. If it's going to be, it likely has to be a Duke loss, and JMU likely not getting in with a win. Maybe if they win by about 50 points and North Texas ekes out a win, I still would lean towards North Texas getting the nod there. But at the end of the day, it seems like it's going to be the American champ if Virginia wins. If Virginia loses, then JMU's got to be able to get a win to find their way into this thing and probably get a win over Troy this weekend. But overall, at the bottom, not too much change. You had a couple of teams shift around just a little bit. You had Iowa get up into this thing. We had Virginia sneak up one more spot. A couple of just minor changes. But let's jump forward to 14, because I think that's when the conversation really starts one way or the other, and there's a lot of differing opinions about how this should have gone. I think Vanderbilt is where they should be. I think that Texas having 3 wins, that is better than any of Vanderbilt's 1 win, especially with the head-to-head, more than outweighs the difference in record. That's a debate that people can have. I tend to lean towards Texas should be above Vanderbilt. I said it yesterday. Vanderbilt was going to be in a bad spot. With those losses to Texas and losses to Alabama, it was going to be really hard to put them in over those 2 teams, even with those 2 teams having 1 extra loss if Bama were to lose this weekend. So I always thought Vanderbilt was in a tough spot. I don't think it's a brand bias thing that some people are saying it is. Maybe it is. I don't know. It is possible that if someone played Vanderbilt's schedule, had the exact same results, they'd be in a much better spot if it was Texas or if it was Alabama. I don't know. I tend to not believe that. But again, that's up for debate. We'll see what happens with Vanderbilt. They got plenty of good news yesterday outside of the CFP rankings, but I think this was probably the reality from the jump, especially with how many teams just kind of handled their business over the last couple of weeks. You got Texas at 13. I think that knocks them out. I really don't see a path for Texas to find their way in. I guess the only way that it could possibly happen is Alabama gets absolutely rolled, BYU gets absolutely rolled, and they both have an injury. Is the really only way that I could see that unfolding. I don't think that's going to happen, and I don't think anyone should root for that to happen. So at the end of the day, I think Texas is fully out of this thing. I talked about it yesterday. I think there's some valid points brought up during the Texas debate that do need to be addressed as we move forward. I don't think this Texas team is in the playoff, and that's not necessarily because they lost to Florida. It's because they didn't handle business at Kentucky. They didn't handle business comfortably, I should say, at Mississippi State. They didn't do the things that a playoff team does, especially when you know you're walking a little bit of a tightrope after that Florida loss. I'll leave it there for the time being. I think people are a little bit sick about talking about the Longhorns. I don't think you'll have to talk about them too much this weekend. I'm sure Longhorn fans will yell because I'm part of that fan base. I promise you, there will be Longhorn fans yelling that they should be in over Alabama if they lose this weekend. I don't think that's happening. I think Texas is fully out. I don't think there's much of a question there. Then you go into the Miami-Notre Dame debate. And what we just talked about with Texas and Vanderbilt, the head-to-head being enough for Texas to jump over them, and I do believe that is totally fair. What are we doing? What are we doing with Miami and Notre Dame? And I've said on here very plainly, I believe Notre Dame is a better football team right now than Miami. If they played tomorrow, I would pick Notre Dame without a question. We're doing a disservice to the sport of college football because I watched it happen. Over 4 quarters, I watched Miami control that game for about 2.5 quarters, and then Notre Dame was able to put together a couple of nice drives to make it look a little bit better. Miami won that game, and they won that game relatively convincingly, at least in my eyes. I get it. Notre Dame has done an incredible job. The last couple of weeks, they played some really high-level football, but when you really just look at the resumes of these two football teams, it's not even remotely close. They don't deserve to be above Miami. They really don't deserve to be. I realize I have one thing wrong on here. Apologies for that. Alabama is above Notre Dame. We'll get to that here in a second, but at the end of the day, Notre Dame is number 10, Miami's number 12. I don't get it. I really don't. I don't get why they're above BYU, but again, that's a discussion for another day. I think BYU is just getting kind of screwed here, if I'm being totally honest, and they want to go into the final weekend with a little bit of drama instead of giving the teams that have earned it all year the credit that they deserve. Again, I believe Notre Dame's a great team. I think they've done incredible things this year, but when your best win is sitting at number 16 in the country and the two best reasons that you're ranked where you are right now is 2 close losses to teams, it's ridiculous, especially when one of those teams is behind you. I don't get it. I don't know why Notre Dame is where they are right now. I've never really gotten it. Frankly, Alabama jumping over Notre Dame should have happened the first rankings. They didn't do it, and now it looks weird that they did it after an Auburn win, but Alabama deserved to be over them from the jump. I believe BYU deserved to be over Notre Dame from the jump. And then I believe you were going to be staring down 2 teams right next to each other in Notre Dame and Miami. And then you got to make a decision. How much does head-to-head actually matter to you? And I think Miami would win that battle. There's still a world where they do win that battle. I just hate that we gave Notre Dame credit for doing something that they hadn't yet and gave them credit for losing 2 close games where they were pretty comfortably the worst team on the football field on both those games. Regardless, at the end of the day, Notre Dame finds their way probably into the playoff. There is one caveat in that. But in terms of CFP hopes, anyone below Miami is absolutely dead in terms of at-large bids. Obviously, Virginia and those group of 5 teams are still firmly in it. Could very well make their appearance in the CFP. But the question is, if BYU loses, who's in? Is it Miami or is it Notre Dame? Because you would assume that would knock BYU maybe below Miami, maybe below Texas. Doesn't really matter at the end of the day. It would knock them out of the playoff and out of any contention. Then you would have Notre Dame and Miami right next to each other. Again, apologies for the mistake here. Notre Dame is number 10, Alabama is number 9. So you would essentially have those 2 teams right next to each other, and you'd have to make a decision. You'd have to decide how much does that week 1 game matter. I can't imagine you pick the team that did not win that football game. I just cannot wrap my head around it, even if I think Notre Dame has played way better football the rest of the way, even if I'd pick Notre Dame tomorrow. I still believe that has to matter. The entirety of the 12 games have to matter, not just a rolling scale from the first week not mattering too much and then the last week mattering the most. It doesn't make sense that way. It should not be that way. But regardless, that's a decision that they're going to have to make. And frankly, if you're Miami, you might be leaning towards Duke winning because then you're in a position where the committee is looking at their bracket and they don't have an ACC team in there. And whether people like this or not, the CFP was created to make sure that those Power 4 conferences were taking up most of the room, taking up all of the room except for one spot. That was the ultimate goal. Well, they could be taking up all the room but two spots, and I think they're going to want to get the other power conference in there. Now, would they want to get Notre Dame in there more? That's a debate to be had. I don't know. I just know that would be a massive conversation on the day, and I fall firmly in the you have to put Miami in that scenario. There is no question about it. The other part of that is Ole Miss, or another point in this. Apologies, moving forward from that. Ole Miss seems to be in great shape. They jump up one spot by virtue of Texas A&M falling down to 7. A little bit lower than maybe I thought they would fall, but I think it makes sense when you really look at the resumes as a whole. But at the end of the day, the only way they move down in my mind is if Alabama beats Georgia, because then I do believe Alabama would jump into those top 4 bye spots because we need to keep the emphasis on these conference championship games, especially in the SEC and the Big Ten. I believe Alabama would jump all the way from number 9 to probably number 4. In that scenario, Texas Tech, if they were to win, would kick up to 3. And then there's obviously chaos scenarios where what happens if Georgia and Texas Tech lose? Then I think you have Alabama go up there. I think you have Oregon probably join those 4 byes. And then you have 3 Big Ten teams sitting in those bye spots. And then you got everyone else, pretty much every SEC team playing a home playoff game, which would be chaotic as can be. But at the end of the day, it would be very, very interesting to watch. Would just create a little bit of an interesting battle when you go into those second round games where it's going to be a lot of SEC versus Big Ten in that one. But at the end of the day, really good news for Ole Miss in all of this. They're pretty much set, and if they stay at 6, they're in a great spot moving forward. If you fall down to 7, things get much harder very quickly. And we'll talk about that here in a second when we break down the bracket. But to me, it's rather set at this point. I think there's a couple of debates that we could have on Selection Sunday, but it's as simple as if BYU wins, I think they're in and Notre Dame's out. If BYU loses, they're out and Notre Dame stays in, or maybe Miami gets in, depending on the conversation that's had in that room. I think Alabama's in there regardless of what happens this weekend, and I really think they should be. I don't think there's much of a debate. I do think they could flip Notre Dame and Alabama again, back from 9-10, if they were to lose, just to avoid some of the rematches that we could very well get and that we are getting currently in this bracket that has come out. So overall, don't have a massive, massive issue with some parts of this. The Miami-Notre Dame thing just doesn't make any sense. If you jumped Alabama over them, which they did, again, apologies for this graphic, but Alabama sitting at 9, Notre Dame sitting at 10, I just don't get why BYU and Miami are not sitting above Notre Dame, at least as of this very moment. I think Notre Dame should need help to get into this playoff, but I guess that's not the way it worked out. We'll see what happens this weekend and on Selection Sunday, but I think Notre Dame's in pretty good shape, and more power to them, I suppose, to be able to play that schedule and find your way into a playoff. Oh, excuse me. We got to get over to the bracket. As it sits today, we have the same top 2 teams as we have for quite some time at this point. Ohio State and Indiana. I think there's a world if Indiana loses and Georgia wins, those two just flip spots, but I don't see much difference outside of that. I think that's just about the extent of it, if I had to imagine. But at the end of the day, you have Ohio State 1, you have Indiana 2, Georgia 3, and Texas Tech has slotted up into that 4 spot. I think they'll stay there with a win, obviously, maybe jump up a little bit further if Georgia were to lose, that type of thing. But I think those 4, if they win out, I think those 4 will be the 4 that get the byes if everything goes chalk this week. And even if Ohio State beats Indiana, I think Indiana's falling at worst to 3, maybe to 4, but I bet it would just be down to 3 and flipping spots with Georgia at the end of the day. But moving to the matchups, Oregon against Tulane would likely be the matchup, at least as of right now. That would be the G5 team that would find their way into this thing as the 12 seed. You can imagine Oregon's favored by a lot in that football game, and they very well should be. That would be in Eugene. They would roll over that team. I have very little question about that. Over in the 6th spot, you have Ole Miss. They found their way up one more spot. They'd get Virginia, at least as of right now. If Duke wins that, then maybe they'd get Tulane, and then then JMU, or maybe North Texas slots in and JMU slots in. again, the G5 spot is going to be very interesting. But that Virginia game, again, they'd be favored by quite a bit in it. Really like this Virginia team. We'll see what Ole Miss looks like with Charlie Weiss calling plays instead of Lane Kiffin, and we'll talk about that here in a second in the next segment. But at the end of the day, they'd be massive favorites, would likely be moving on to a rematch with the Georgia Bulldogs, which would be a massive one. And then we get 2 rematches in the first round, at least as of right now. Oklahoma, Alabama would face off once again, this time in Norman. I'd lean towards Oklahoma. I have no reason not to lean towards the team that beat them the first time around. And then A&M Notre Dame, a very different Notre Dame than they were the first time around, but this one would be in College Station. That would be a very, very fun atmosphere. Again, I talked about it before. I do think if Alabama were to lose this weekend, they might just kick down one spot to where Notre Dame plays Oklahoma, Alabama plays A&M, and that's just kind of the long and short of it. Obviously, some things could change within the seating outside of that, but that's the normal change that I see, that I could very well see happening. Overall, really like this bracket. I think there's some movement to be had, especially in that 5 to 8 range, depending on if Alabama were to win or if BYU were to win. That would totally change up the way that things are working here. So overall, some really, really fun matchups here. I think this would be a really fun watch if this is what we end up getting. I tend to believe we're going to see a couple of ers and ahs towards the end of this thing. Will Notre Dame fall out? Will BYU be able to jump into this thing? Well, they're going to need to win to jump into this thing. I said that yesterday. If they weren't in this bracket tonight, they were going to be in a really bad position going into this weekend. If you win, you're totally fine. If you lose, I think you're on the outside looking in, and I don't think you should be. I'll just leave it at that for the time being. We can talk about it more on Monday when all of this is set in stone. But really the only thing to happen here is if Bama loses, what happens with them in Notre Dame, / if Notre Dame is in a position where they could possibly fall down a couple of spots, and then you're in a position where they're right next to Miami, and you got to make a decision. If you're the College Football Playoff Committee, I'm not sure they're going to make the right one, but we'll see what happens there. If BYU does lose, then I think we have a little bit of a debate in that room at the end of the day. But overall, it was very impactful rankings. I don't think there's any question about that. I think there were very, very important things that did come out during this. Obviously, maybe the biggest one of the bunch is Texas is definitely out of this thing. There's no question about that. They're definitely out of the CFP. I don't think there's any amount of craziness that could really happen to make them into this thing. Maybe a bunch of injuries, maybe some crazy things. Maybe they get tired of arguing the Notre Dame-Miami thing and just throw Texas in there. Would make a lot of people very angry, including myself, but at the end of the day, I guess there's life for the Longhorns. I don't think it's much, and I don't think you should really hold your breath down there in Austin. But at the end of the day, we got a lot of answers, and how this is going to go down, I think we have an idea of how all of this is going to go down this weekend, and it really comes down to, does BYU win, do they lose, and what does that mean for Notre Dame and Miami? That's pretty much the long and short of it. And then we'll see if Duke can kind of throw a wrench into this thing and give JMU a shot at a CFP. But that'll be really fun to watch. We will obviously break it down on Monday. We'll break down the bracket, all of the matchups, and get into that ad nauseum over the next couple of weeks as we get closer to these first round games. But let's do a little bit of a weekend roundup. We'll do all of the coaching carousel talk. We'll talk about Penn State's debacle, I think, is probably the best way to describe it. We'll talk about early signing day very briefly. We'll get into some best bets, and then we'll send you off into a championship weekend. Again, apologies for a weird schedule this week. Very, very busy time over here. But at the end of the day, let's take our break here, and we will be right back with that. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the CFP rankings that came out yesterday. Got quite a few answers. It feels like we're in a position where BYU wins, Notre Dame is out, BYU loses, Notre Dame is in, maybe Miami is in, depending on what that debate is in that room, and then maybe there's some chaos that could happen possibly with Texas. I don't think that's remotely going to happen. So I don't think people have to worry about that one too much. We will go ahead and move forward to just a little bit of a roundup to end off this week. We'll kind of put a lot of things into this segment just to get everything kind of wrapped up as we head into an incredible weekend of football, and don't let anyone tell you differently. But Charlie Weis Jr. is going to return to call plays for Ole Miss throughout the playoff. He will go back to LSU and be their offensive coordinator at the end of this entire thing, but this is massive for Ole Miss. This is something that I was very worried about who was going to call plays, what that was going to look like, if it was going to be there was going to be continuity in the way that they called the plays, but how much continuity? I think you did about as good as you were going to do. I think you nailed it. I think this is someone that you very badly needed, and I think it's a massive win for this team, for these players. Obviously, this has created a world where some people are asking the question of, why can't Lane do it? If Charlie Weis can go back and do it, then why can't Lane do it? First of all, Lane's the head coach of LSU. He's got tons more on his plate than Charlie Weis Jr. does. He has a ton more to do over the next little bit than Charlie Weis Jr. does. So I believe Charlie Weis Jr. can actually push himself into this and be full on for Ole Miss, and then flip his attention when this thing is fully done. The other part of this, and it was Cole Kublik that put this absolutely perfectly on his radio show earlier today or yesterday, I believe. Why did Lane Kiffin, it felt like the entire time Lane Kiffin was trying to leverage Ole Miss. He was trying to leverage, we'll leave and we'll take all the staffers with us if you don't let me coach the rest of the way. Why aren't you leveraging LSU? Why are you saying, if you really want me, I'm not signing this contract until we're done with this playoff run? I want to coach this team. There's no question about it. You're going to have to eat this one way or another. I am not going to be your head coach until I'm done with this football team, and then I will. Then I think Ole Miss would have been fine. I really do. I don't necessarily think they would have been super happy about it, and it would have been known behind closed doors that he was leaving at the end of it. But it wouldn't have been this messy, and you would have been in the position where, at the very least, you are the Ole Miss head coach, and then you're out the LSU head coach. You're not the LSU head coach coaching Ole Miss through a playoff run. That's just a little side note there. It was just very interesting to hear someone break it down that way, because I hadn't really thought about it this entire time. Lane Kiffin was trying to leverage, and you can say blackmail, but I'll just say leverage, Ole Miss into letting him coach the CFP. Why wasn't he leveraging LSU to let him coach the CFP and not let all of this get out as quickly as it did? That's beside the point. The point is, Charlie Weis Jr. will be with this team going forward. It's massive. It's someone you very badly needed, even if it's for just the playoff run and then he's out the door. Even if he's talking to a couple of players and saying, you're going to come on over to Baton Rouge next year, right? I get it. That's part of this, and it's going to be a little bit upsetting for some Ole Miss fans. I think it's a massive win for y'all. I was worried about the Ole Miss offense, and I talked about it yesterday. Was very worried about what this was going to look like in the playoff. With him back in the picture, I'm much less worried. I think they're in a really good position, and you could get in a position where you play the ACC champ, maybe Virginia, or you play North Texas, or you play one of these G5 teams, and then maybe play Indiana, depending on how things roll out the rest of the way. You have a chance to do something pretty special, and getting this guy back in the room is massive. Huge amount of respect to Ole Miss for doing this, because they didn't have to by any means. They could have let Joe Judge call plays and called it a day, but Charlie Weis Jr. is a very, very smart guy. I think they nailed this. I guess credit to LSU as well for letting him do it. I think they should have let him do it. I think that's normal to let him do this, but at the end of the day, I think this is a massive thing for Ole Miss, and definitely makes me much more confident than I was yesterday when I talked about Ole Miss's offense in the playoff. DJ Durkin is going to stick around in Auburn with Alex Golesh. Massive. It's one thing you absolutely had to have happen in this cycle, because a lot of those kids were going to walk out the door if DJ walked out the door. And you have some very talented defensive players, especially in your back end, that you do not want to lose. I can almost promise you, Auburn's going to put on a top 25 defense next year, maybe even better, depending on the guys they get to replace a Keldrick Falk, replace a Kieron Crawford, I believe, is gone. Some Auburn fans can correct me on that. But at the end of the day, nailed it. Now it's about that offense getting in place, not losing Cam Coleman, trying to keep Deuce Knight around, making sure that this thing works going forward. I'm not saying Auburn's going to be an elite team next year, but if they can keep some of these talented players around, they just got a great coach to coach their defense. I think they have an awesome offensive play caller in Alex Golesh, and they could do something pretty special if they can keep Cam Coleman and those wide receivers around Auburn. Blake Baker's decision. That's a very interesting saga, kind of side saga going on over there around LSU. This is a massive one. It sounds like Blake Baker has a offer on the table to return to LSU under Lane Kiffin to be his defensive coordinator. Obviously, Pete Golding taking over there at Ole Miss, so a lot of the defensive staff is going to be replaced. You really hope you can keep this guy. The other part of it is, it seems like he has an offer on the table from Tulane to be their head coach. I tend to believe he will stay in Baton Rouge. I tend to believe he thinks that this is a place he can win a national title and then possibly get an SEC job or a big-time job down the road. And I think there's a couple that are a little bit rickety at this very moment moving forward. So I would understand either way. The Tulane job is rather special. You can do some really incredible things there. The last number of coaches have done some great things there. So I wouldn't be surprised either way. I tend to believe he is going to stick around in LSU, and if he does, that's as massive, or maybe even bigger, than keeping DJ Durkin around for Auburn. Absolutely huge for LSU if you can keep him around. If you can't, they got to go find a defensive coordinator and a very good one to replace this guy. Kentucky has officially hired Will Stein. We talked about it a little bit on Monday, I believe. We broke this down a little bit. Mark Stoops out the door after a really successful time over there at Kentucky. This stuff happened so quickly, you didn't really get to appreciate Mark Stoops. Did an incredible job over there a number of different times. The new age of college football kind of got away from him and kind of got away from Kentucky a little bit. And that'll be an interesting thing to watch as they get into this new era. I think Will Stein is incredible. He's impressed me every single year and kind of in a different way every single year. It's not just the development of quarterbacks. It's not just putting his team in position to score a ton of points every single game. The ability to make that offensive line work and work in an incredible way. Obviously, a ton of credit to that overall staff on the offense, but Will Stein's kind of the mastermind behind the entire thing. I think he can do things schematically that can make your program more dangerous than maybe your talent level would have you suggest. That's exactly what Kentucky has to do. And the most important part of this is the staff he builds around him. With every one of these coaches, really, but especially a new head coach, you can't pull quite as many guys. You don't have the pull of like a Dan Lanning going from if he were to leave Oregon and go to Alabama in this hypothetical. He would be able to pull a number of guys, a number of coordinators and position coaches and all of that stuff. When you're an offensive coordinator, you can pull some offensive staffers. You can maybe pull a quarterback coach to be your OC, all of that good stuff, but not nearly as many guys. He's likely going to have to build an entire defensive staff, and we'll get to why here in a second. It's going to be a massively important thing because you are fighting uphill over there at Kentucky. That is going to be a really, really hard job to win consistently at. I think this guy is special enough to do some really cool things, and then we'll see how long-term this is. I know he was a Kentucky fan growing up before he went to Louisville, so a little bit of an interesting dynamic there as we get into this one, but I think he's a very special head coach, and I think he's going to do really fun things over there at Kentucky. Maybe not in 2026 because of that schedule, but beyond, I believe he has a ton of really, really good things to give the Wildcat faithful. Cal has hired Tosh Lupoy. That is why Will Stein will have to replace a lot of the defensive staff. Oregon's going to lose both their coordinators. The Oregon defensive coordinator, Tosh Lupoy, is going to Cal. Makes sense. He's a Cal alum, used to play there, and I think they nailed it. I think this is the absolute perfect hire in so many different ways. Another part of this is I don't think JKS is going anywhere. Everyone's talked about where JKS is going, if he's going to, one of the big-time schools, how much he's going to get paid, all of this type of stuff. He'll have offers. There's no doubt about that. He probably already has offers. There's no doubt about that. But I think he loves Cal. He was committed to Cal before he went to Oregon. I think he realized he made a little bit of a mistake pulling that trigger on Oregon that quickly. He went back to Cal, and he loves it. And especially if Tosh Lupoy can hold on to Nick Rolovich and Brian Harsin, I think JKS wants to be there. So I think this Cal job is one that you flip a couple of switches in the right direction, you can do some really interesting things. And in the ACC, that going into next year, can anyone tell me who the favorite in the ACC is? I'm not saying Cal's going to go on a title run. I'm not saying Cal's going to go on a CFP run in year one under Tosh Lupoy. I'm just saying there's an opening there, especially if you keep that quarterback around and you keep those two offensive-minded guys around. And Penn State. Let's go ahead and get into this. It's bad. It's really, really bad. Kalani Sitake is going to stick around in BYU. If you didn't see that, figured I'd just talk about it here. He has signed a big time extension with them. Sounds like everyone got involved over there, and I truly do mean everyone, all the way up to the church. It was a big time effort to keep that guy in Provo, and they have done that. There's a couple of things that are happening here, and first of all, I do want to get this out of the way. They fired James Franklin really early. They did it to get a jump on this coaching search, and now you're last in line. Period. End of story. There's no real good way to spin that. They firing James Franklin was the right decision. I still believe that. I'm going to believe that even if the next head coach does not go well. He had chances. He had plenty of chances to do some special things. All that being said, it cannot be fun to be watching right now as a Penn State fan as all of your signees go down to Blacksburg and start a very good class down there in Virginia Tech. You are currently sitting at 139th in the country in recruiting, right between Montana State and Akron. I think you have 4 players. As far as I know, you have 4 players in your class right now. It's signing day, and they don't have a head coach, and they fired their head coach as early as just about anyone this cycle. How? How do you mess this up this poorly? And it's not to say that they were always going to get the first guy, or if they didn't get the first guy, this thing was going to be a disaster. This thing is a disaster for a million different reasons, and there were 10 different guys that they didn't get that they probably should have gotten, or at the very least should have known that they weren't going to get. So the way I like to break this down is this. Penn State is a really good job. They have incredible things about them. You can do incredible things there. You can build a remarkable program at that place. Why in the world would Lane Kiffin leave USC for Penn State right now, especially with how this coaching search has been conducted? Why would Kalen DeBoer leave Alabama unless he was very unhappy at Alabama, which I really don't think he is. I don't know if he loves it. I don't know if it's the best place for him long term. I know he's doing well enough to where that place is a really fun place to hang out right now for Kalen DeBoer. Why did you think you were going to get these really, really high-level coaches that, in all seriousness, you didn't have a shot to get? It's not to say that Penn State shouldn't shoot shots. It's not to say Penn State shouldn't go after big names and try to get them. It's just to say you were going after 10 out of 10 hires when you just had to get a 7 out of 10 hire that had a different way of going about business than your last 7 out of 10. I don't understand the way they attacked this from the jump, and now they're in a position where they're last in line. And you lost out on some really remarkable candidates, including a guy that you circled a week and a half ago in Bob Chesney. He's already signed with UCLA. There's a couple of Penn State fans that are holding out hope for that one. He's signed. He's going to UCLA. There's not a question there. And if he breaks that contract, then we got a problem between UCLA and Penn State. But regardless, who are they going to hire? I really don't know. Now, all that being said, all the disaster and all the things that are going wrong and Pat Kraft handling this poorly and all of that said, my favorite for the job from the absolute jump was Brian Hartline. I believe that guy can build something very special over there at Penn State going forward the next couple of years. I want it to be very, very clear now. Now that we're at signing day, now that we're at a point where you can't sign high school recruits for this class, whoever you hire. I don't care if it's Brian Hartline. I don't care if it's Brian Dable. I don't care if it's Jeff Brom, which has been talked about a little bit. Matt Campbell possibly gets back into this mix, and he should have been in it from the jump. Frankly, should have been your first call, but that's, again, beside the point. If they get in this, and if they decide to take over Penn State, you're going to have to give them time. Point blank period. You are not going to be a great team in 2026. You don't have the players. You're going to lose a lot of players through the portal. There's already players online tweeting out who's our next head coach and saying they want to hit up different agents to figure out what their next move is. You are going to lose a lot of your players. You are not going to bring in a big-time class, or you're not going to bring in a big-time high school class for obvious reasons because you don't have a head coach right now. And they're going to have to go into the portal. And they're going to have to be perfect in the portal for y'all to do anything special next year. All this to say, whoever you hire at this point is working uphill. You have to be willing to give him time. It can't be as simple as if you don't win 10 games like James Franklin was for all those years, you're out the door in 3 years. It's going to be really hard to make this work quickly. You have to give this guy time. Now, I still think Brian Hartline, if you do it, I think you nailed it. I think it's an incredible coach that in 5 years can have Penn State in a very good position. But it very well might take 5 years to have you in the position that you really want to be in. Not necessarily, you can win 10 games with a portal class. There's no doubt about that. But to be the program that you want to be long term, it's going to take time. And you're going to have to be patient. And that's not something Penn State fans wanted to do, especially when you weren't patient with James Franklin. I don't think you made a bad decision firing James Franklin. I think Pat Kraft has handled this as poorly as he possibly could have, both from the people that he was going after from initially, how hard he was pushing for them, how long he waited for some of these people to make their decisions, and now you're in a position where high school kids are about to walk onto that campus, about 4 of them are about to walk onto that campus and wonder where their head coach is. Or if they have a head coach, they're going to wonder if they actually like that head coach. It's a disaster. There's really no other way to put it. I hope they get a good head coach. If they hire Brian Hartline, I'm all on board. I think you're going to do incredible things. It'll just take more time than you want it to take, and that's Penn State's fault. That's Pat Kraft's fault, plain and simple. So we'll see who they end up hiring. I like to think it'll be done by the end of this week, and we'll be able to talk about it next week. But who knows at this point? I don't know what they're trying to do, but they are doing this very, very poorly. My bet would be Jeff Brom at this very moment. Who knows what happens over the next couple of days? Maybe he doesn't even want it at this point. A couple of early signing day news before we get out of here. I'll go over this in much more detail next week. Just want to make sure everyone knows that there are some remarkable players that you need to have on your radar. There's some remarkable classes being put together that we will get into more depth with. Just got to touch on a couple of things here today just because the next couple of days are going to be chaotic. A lot is going to change. Don't want to say anything that's absolutely wrong right now. One thing that I know is absolutely right is Jared Curtis has flipped to Vandy from Georgia, the #1 quarterback in the country. Massive. It is one of the biggest flips in the history of SEC recruiting, one of the bigger flips in the history of high school recruiting. Vanderbilt got the guy, and they got a huge, huge player, and the talent level is out of this world. You don't have to watch much of this kid to know that there's something special about what that kid can do. I've never seen arm strength like that. I really haven't. It's absolutely ridiculous what this kid can do with the football. I have some questions about him rolling into his freshman year being the starter for this football team. Not to say he can't be successful, not to say Vanderbilt won't be a good team next year. He has played inferior talent in high school. Same argument people made about Bryce Underwood a little bit. Same exact argument people made about Arch Manning. We've seen what happened with Bryce Underwood this year. With Arch Manning, if he was thrust into that spot as a true freshman, I think we all kind of agree that wouldn't have looked too pretty. I think there's going to be moments where this kid absolutely wows you, and he does something truly remarkable. He has remarkable speed, a really great contact balance at 6'3", 225, I think. He's ridiculous. He's an athletic freak. There's no two ways about that, and he's going to do great things for this football team. Tim Beck's going to put him in great situations, all of that great stuff. I think it's going to take him a little bit more time to get to the level that he is more than capable of being, and it'll be really fun to watch what he can do over there at Vanderbilt and see if he can keep this thing rolling. Very impressive kid. One of those guys that you watch the tape and immediately are saying, there's something different about that one. Even if he's playing inferior talent, there's something a little bit different about what this kid can do on the football field. And he gets to go to the Commodores and keep this thing rolling, hopefully for them. I have some questions about his freshman year, but again, we can talk about that more in time. And if he is named the starter in his freshman year, that's just an assumption of mine. But Georgia has no backup plan here. They should be okay in the long term at quarterback. Gunnar Stockton will be back next season. Then it could be Ryan Puglisi or Ryan Montgomery, or maybe a transfer comes in for a year as a bridge quarterback. And then as long as you hold on to Jaden Wade in the 2027 class, you should be okay. This is a loss that is a gun punch. There's no doubt about that. That's a very talented kid that Georgia very much thought was going to be leading them for the next 3 or 4 years right after Gunnar walked out the door. That's no longer the case. So they're going to have to figure out something a little bit different, but overall, they should be okay at the quarterback position. Just didn't want to lose this kid by any means, especially to an SEC rival. But at the end of the day, massive recruitment by Clark Lee and Vanderbilt, and they get a kid that I think is going to be an absolute freak. Just might take him a little bit of time. Some other things to watch today, just general things. USC's putting together the best class in the entire country. Top class right now, still very much cooking. They got Luke Waffle to officially commit and sign today. Incredible group they have going on over there. And I said to people, Lincoln Riley's pressing the right buttons over there, and I feel like people kind of scoff at that and kind of overlook it. He's doing something special over there, and it's well worth watching. Texas sits at number 7th right now in the overall class. As Sark is one to do since he's shown up at Texas, they're going to have some fireworks here late. They always love to flip a couple of guys. Already did earlier this week. There could be a couple more coming the next couple of days because they are trying to hunt down a couple of Lane Kiffin's guys over there at LSU. Richard Anderson, the number 1 defensive lineman in the class. Lamar Brown, the number 1 offensive lineman in the class. I think Lamar Brown is a little bit more A&M battle for LSU if I had to imagine. Richard Anderson's firmly Texas or LSU. Both have pushed back their signing days to, I believe, Friday. Obviously, a lot of this can change as well. So we'll see what happens there. If Richard Anderson and Lamar Brown stay with LSU, you have a great class. There's no doubt about that. Won't be downright elite, but with the coaching change, that's totally normal. If you keep those two guys, I think you're in great shape. And obviously, you have a portal class coming in that will be downright incredible. For Texas, I think they got a really good class right now. A couple more adds would be very important, but again, a team that is going to lean into the portal probably more this offseason than they ever have under Sark, and we'll see what it looks like on January 20th when all of this is over and you probably have your roster going into next season. But overall, we'll talk about this much more detail next week. We'll get into some guys to watch, my favorite signees, some classes that I think are incredible, some underrated classes, all of that good stuff we will get into next week. But just some overarching things to watch as we get into what is always a crazy couple of days around the world of college football. And then we got some best bets. Let's finish it off here with 5 best bets. Let's just try to go over 500. Let's throw three for 5 here. Let's go 3-2 in these 5 games, and I'll do it. I'm gonna do Georgia minus 2.5 over Alabama. I think they're gonna win this football game. I think it's a massively different team than it was when they played the first time around. I think that pass rush is much better than it was the first time around. I think that Alabama pass game has been a little bit out of sync as it hasn't been in the previous games. And I think that Georgia run game is just at a higher level. If Drew Bobo is on that football field, I have no question about it. If Drew Bobo is not, I have some more questions, but I still think Georgia is able to get this one done, win by at least a field goal down there in Atlanta, and avenge one of those big losses from this season. Ohio State minus 4 against Ohio State minus 4 over Indiana. Apologies. Ohio State minus 4 over Indiana. They've covered just about every single spread that they have played this year. I think they're winning this one by at least a touchdown. It's not a disrespect to Indiana. It's just one of those things. If you see a line that short with an Ohio State team like this one, I'm going to go ahead and take it. Duke and Virginia, over 57.5. I just think these teams are going to get after each other pretty good. I think the Duke run defense is not going to have a great day. I think Virginia is going to do enough to slow down the Duke run game. Can they slow down Darian Mensah enough is a big-time question mark for me. I think we could have a 31-28 type football game here. Can't exactly remember what I picked yesterday. I think it was 31-24. Let's kick that up a couple of points to 31-28, and I think it's going to be a very fun game, back and forth, up and down that football field. I'll take Ohio State, Indiana under 47.5, so I'll double up on that football game. I think it's just going to be a little bit of a rock fight. I think Ohio State's going to play the possession game the way they have all year. I think they jump out to a relatively early lead, and I don't want to say sit on the ball, but at least play this thing a little bit more conservatively as they head to a finish line. I think they win this one by maybe about 7 points, and they handle business 27-17 is what I had last time or yesterday. Feel like that's roughly about right. And then I'm going to take James Madison. I think James Madison's a little bit angry right now. I think they have a little bit of juice in them. I think they cover 23.5 against Troy. It is a very aggressive spread. It's a very aggressive play. But I think this team has a little bit of juice going into this weekend. I think they want style points to see if they could jump over North Texas, even if they were to beat Tulane. I think they want a shot at this thing, and I don't think they want to have to rely on Duke to make it. I think they try to run up the score in this one. Whether or not it makes a difference, I don't know. But I do think James Madison covers that 23.5 spread against Troy. But an incredible weekend ahead. We have so much awesome football that is going to happen. And before we get out of here, There's a number of people throughout this week, in the next couple of days, and leading up into this weekend and on Saturday. They're going to tell you that these games don't matter. They're going to tell you that these games are not important. Obviously, Ohio State, Indiana probably both getting a bye. Alabama, Georgia probably both in regardless of what happens in that game. I get all that. Walk into any of those football facilities around the country, whether it's Texas Tech or BYU or Ohio State or Indiana or Georgia or Alabama, and tell them that this game doesn't matter. You might get hit in the face. These guys really care about this stuff. These guys are competitors. They want to be lifting that SEC trophy. They want to be lifting that Big 10, Big 12, ACC trophy. They want this. They really do. Ohio State hasn't been at the top of the Big 10 in quite some time. They want that. Indiana, I don't know when the last time they won it or if they've ever won it. They want this one. Georgia and Alabama, I don't have to explain Georgia, Alabama to people to understand that it is going to be intense in that building. These guys care. I know it might not have a massive impact on what the playoff looks like at the end of the day. These guys care about this game, and it is something that we have to keep putting into people because everyone tries to tell me that these games don't matter, tries to tell me that they should be resting players, they shouldn't be playing everyone. It's ridiculous. These guys want to be out there, they want to compete, they want to win that trophy for nothing more than it's that trophy. It's a conference championship in a very, very tough conference for all of these football teams. Enjoy these games. Don't let anyone tell you that these games don't matter. And please do follow on all of my social pages, JACFB Podcast on X and Instagram. You can follow my personal one, Brzee_Thomas. I'll be posting all weekend. But now I'm off to Washington, D.C. I'm going to Washington, D.C. tomorrow. And if I have a chance, I will try to fix college football. I'll try to fix college sports really quickly in my time over there. But apologies for a little bit of a different schedule this week. But we had to do it. We will be off to Washington, D.C. I'll be back on Monday to break it all down. All of the games, the new CFP, what that looks like, a little bit of early look on those matchups, all of the good stuff that is going to be happening over this weekend. We will break it down on Monday, I absolutely promise you. But thank you so much for tuning in. Please do like, subscribe, comment, do all of that great stuff. Means the world to me, helps me out a ton. And we got a great weekend of football coming up. Enjoy it all, and I will be back here on Monday to break it all down for you.